the most horrifying images I think that have ever actually been produced for publics. But it's also like, I feel like it's my duty to look, and it's sometimes to do the work of looking, because to look away from that is in itself a violence. Just to look and to be witness to it, I think, is an important thing that we have to do. But
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the 4th episode of Other Armenias podcast. I'm your host, Milena Abrahamian.
And I am your co-host, Tamar Shirinyan.
So today we're having a discussion with Nelli Sargsyan, who is Associate Professor of Anthropology at Emerson College in Boston, Massachusetts, and also the coordinator of the Women's Gender and Sexuality Studies minor. Welcome, Nelli. Thank you for agreeing to be part of this conversation today with us.
Thank you so much, dear Milena and Tamar.
So today, our conversation is around the topic of Palestine, and how we see the interconnections of the Palestinian struggle with Armenian struggle, with our own kind of context and histories. So this is what we're going to be having a conversation with among the three of us about. And before we start off, I would love to say that please subscribe, like, and comment on this video if you're watching. And then you can also get more. If you're subscribed, you'll be able to see every single time we have a new episode launch. So let's start off with the question of how we came to solidarity with Palestine as individuals.
Do you want to start off as co-hosts and then I'll join? How do you want to go about it?
Yeah, that's fine. Milena, you can start.
Okay. I haven't really practiced what I'm going to say about this, but I know how I came into solidarity with Palestine. I was a student at Hunter College in New York City, which is a city university, considered a city university of New York. It's a commuter college, mostly working class, lots of immigrants, and I was a women and gender studies major. So I had some amazing professors through whom I came to feminism and activism. And so I was part of like the student movement against like increasing prices of tuition. I took part in the V-Day movement. I performed the vagina monologues, organized it, and also sort of started to become more politicized. And the group of some amazing feminists, queers, activists that were also students who were my peers, together we would kind of go to different protests that were happening around the time. This was in 2008, 9, something like that. And I remember when Sean Bell was killed by the police, being shot 50 times. And so we joined this protest and this movement, I think in where he was, like in the neighborhood where he lived. So against police brutality, and yeah, basically like violence that was happening. And then through that circle of people who were really like caring and thinking and angry about these injustices, I also came to basically, I was going to some protests. I think also in 2008, Israel was bombing. I don't know if it was Gaza, but I just remember that it was like just there was, I mean, when was Israel not bombing Palestine or like not occupying, not settling, not, you know, oppressing and just doing this like this genocide? It's like quite extended, right? It's not just something that's started 2 years ago, although it's just so much more intense, right? Since the past 2 years. But I remember very distinctly how I was learning more about this movement. And to be honest, it's not like I learned everything when I was 21 about Palestine and the whole struggle. It took many, many years for me to really understand like what's happening and why it's important for the world and for our own kind of movements. But I sort of knew where my heart was at. And I knew that there was something wrong with what's happening to the Palestinian people. And, you know, I was just getting like little bits and pieces of sort of information and feeling and from people around me, like also Palestinian artists and poets, activists, but not only. So this is pretty much how I came to it.
Yeah, I think I haven't really, you know, I haven't been able to think through the questions either, but you know, listening to you, I see a lot of parallels. Like for me, it was also interestingly the first memory I actually have of realizing that Palestine was a question, was an issue that I felt an affinity toward, was during protests following the killing of Oscar Grant in Oakland in 2009. And I had just graduated from college, and I do have memories of, you know, I was a student at Berkeley, and there were organizations. There was a Palestinian student organization, and they were constantly under fire. And I remember that being a part of discussion on campus. And I remember there also being Zionist organizations on campus, and that being a conflict. But I didn't really come to the realization that this was something more than some, you know, one particular kind of niche issue that some people, because of their ethnic identity or whatever, should be thinking about during that protest. And that protest was a small protest. It was high school students. It was a group of high school students who had joined what were much larger protests in Oakland, marching down the street and connecting the killing of Oscar Grant to the killing of Palestinian children. And that was it was during, if I'm not mistaken, it was during the so-called First Gaza War, 2008, 2009, and which is, I think, around the same time that you were talking about. And I think from then on, it really became a matter of, you know, in some ways, Palestine as a question, the need for Palestinian solidarity, and my feeling of being called to that issue was constantly coming up regularly because of wars, right? And constant wars. So 2008, 2009, 2012, 2014, 2018, 2021, and so again and again and again. And so like every one of those moments was like an opportunity for me to learn about what this struggle is, about what this violence looks like. But I have to say that I didn't quite feel myself kind of declaring that I was in solidarity with Palestine and kind of showing up regularly beyond just the kind of knowing that things are happening because now there's a war, but following following the military occupation and the constant killing and the bombardment and the siege and all of that in Gaza and in larger Palestine, when I started teaching, because I realized that, I teach courses on, social movements, revolution, gender, sexuality, human rights, genocide, and environmental anthropology, and everything that I teach, basically everything that I'm interested as a scholar, as a social scientist who's particularly attuned to dynamics of power and violence, is right there happening in the most intense of ways in Palestine. And so because of teaching over the years, I've learned a lot more about the history of the occupation of Palestine, and the violence toward Palestinian people, as well as the struggles that the Palestinian people have done. Yeah.
I really appreciate hearing both of you speak and noticing the parallels between your coming into thinking more actively, I suppose, about Palestine. It's interesting for me. It didn't start being in solidarity with Palestine didn't start with Palestine, but rather with the invasion of Iraq in 2002. I was in the US for the first time for a year at a university, and this was the time where there were protests against upcoming invasion of Iraq, where I was in Connecticut, and it was the first time that the people who are very Americans, who are very, friendly and, I don't know, librarians and people working at the university where I was, at Fairfield University, and helping me and my, colleague and friend from Kyrgyzstan. We were both visiting Fairfield University. And I just, in a conversation about these protests and these decisions, and I realized that for the first time that it is possible to see the US as something other than an empire, because I was talking to an American friend, and I was like, I don't understand why people would support the government. It's just about accessing resources. Why isn't that clear? And this friend was like, we have to trust our leaders. We don't really know everything, and they're in charge, and they know. And Americans are, just this fairy tale about spreading democracy, through but missing the violence and seizing resources and stuff like that. And then in another, I thought this was just an one-off, perspective. And then I was invited for dinner, and again the issue came up, and the host said, "Oh yeah, we have to bomb the fuck out of those." And I was like, "John, you realize that's like, and then if there's collateral damage, there's collateral damage." And I was like, "You realize I live there, so I would be collateral damage or my family, if you bomb Iraq, Iran, and people." And it was the first time I saw myself in relation to people in that region. Do you see? Rather than Armenia as different from other places, especially Arab majority countries. I don't remember when I was growing up and lived in Armenia as an adult, affinity or being cultivated between Armenia as a state and, let's say, Iraq, for example, or Armenians and Iraqis. And of course, before then, just the struggles of Kurds and but there was this element of thinking that there are these people struggle in different places. I wasn't exactly making connections other than individually being in solidarity of those being bombed, of course. And so from an American imperialist perspective that was manifested through this, person's utterance, I don't know, I was kind of shocked into reality. It's like, oh my God, as I heard myself speak, that, yeah, like, why hadn't I just actively realized this, And then in 2005, I was co-teaching a course at a university in Armenia with an American a co-teacher, and we were talking about war and being in solidarity with, those who are experiencing these different kinds of violences. And one of my Armenian students said, yeah, but it's different, Iraqis and Syrians, they're used to being bombed, so it's not anything. And that's exactly that was my reaction, Milena, and my jaw dropped, that I understood this cultivation of distance and inhumanity in my own society. That's why I myself hadn't seen myself in relation to the people of the region. I wasn't thinking in those terms as my student, but I recognized the distance that had been cultivated. And that was quite shocking. And similarly to you, Tamar, in terms of teaching. So, and because through teaching, and also my attention to language, I was interested in language, and so I did my PhD in linguistic anthropology. I wasn't interested in fundamental linguistics, but language and social context. How discourses proliferate and how propaganda is circulating within the society, and through like regular citizens who are hosting me, for example, in the US, or my fellow citizens in Armenia. And so in graduate school, I was I focused on discourses, and as a graduate student, I was teaching anthropology of gender, and it was at this time. So this is 2011 already. So the things that I was mentioning, my visit to the US, 2002, co-teaching in Armenia, 2005, and then I have this gap between 2005 and 2010, 2011. So I started teaching anthropology of gender, and then incorporating, different films and articles about basically how we're disciplined into certain forms of sanctioned masculinities and, femininities. And one of them was about, that I chose, was what it's like to be a gendered being under occupation. And through my choice of film that I hadn't seen, but it looked, poignant, and was raising these kinds of issues about, Palestinian struggle during the Second Intifada. I think that kind of more centered the issue of Palestine for me, and then the ongoingness. And so then it was on my radar already more actively than before. And I was starting to notice these connections and the need for horizontal care or attention, investment in each other's pains and struggles, and desires for various forms of liberation. And then the ongoingness of like not letting Palestinians live, right, in even relative, it's not even peace, but just lack of being bombed, because peace is not just not being bombed, right? There's more that goes into peace that allows you to imagine life, you can plan performances, you can decide in what way you want to contribute to your own critical consciousness, the society within which you live, but they're not getting that opportunity to breathe because you said, you're right, 2008, and then after that, I don't know, 11, 14, just like the non-stop. And or because I was already in the US, it was present. And then I'm just paying attention to the ongoing discourses. And the comfort in this barbaric approach to talking about Palestinians. So for me, it's the oppressive language and thinking and ideology is barbaric and brutal and dehumanized and recruiting the others into this process of dehumanization. It's never about, I hear this about Palestinians being dehumanized. It's not Palestinians who are being dehumanized. It's those who who speak about Palestinians as if lesser, who are dehumanizing themselves and robbing themselves of their humanity, corroding their humanity, and then recruiting others, or manufacturing consent. And 2016 is when I saw all these connections, interrelatedness. And it's, oh my gosh, I took a long time to answer this question, but it was a long process. Yeah.
Yeah, on that question of, the Iraqis and Syrians being used to, being bombed.
I was thinking about that too.
Like the necro political horror of and I remember thinking this in 2006 when Israel started bombing Lebanon, and my mom and I were watching the news, and I think we were watching CNN or something, and they were talking about how desperately the US is trying to evacuate the Americans from Lebanon. And I remember just thinking wait, but if they need to be evacuated because their lives are in danger, then shouldn't they be evacuating the entirety of Lebanon? That's when no, some people are meant to just suffer and die and are just collateral damage, and other people are deserve full lives and safety and are not naturalized as those who should be bombed.
Yeah, this is why I hate the language or this term resilient. When people talk about, oh, these people are so resilient, I'm like, you're basically telling me I'm really good at holding heavy shit. You're basically telling me I'm really good at taking all of the violence on my body. And then I'm really good at maybe not getting sick or not dying right away, basically,
And that you can take more.
Yeah, exactly.
It's an assignment. It's an assignment. Yeah,
Exactly.
you got this. You can take more. You're used to this. The inhumanity in that isn't projected, instead of recognizing where in your life have you not been loved enough that this is what brings you pleasure, another suffering. This is always my question for all the levels of inflicting violence and orienting people towards death.
And I mean, there's also this thing of in saying that, well, these people are used to being bombed. It's I wonder, because I don't think anyone can really ever get used to being bombed, even if even if you bomb someone a place I don't know, continuously. I don't think that it's something you could ever get used to. It's not I don't know, you get used to the heat, or you get used to the cold, or you get used to, I don't know, it's just there's certain things that I don't think that it's physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually possible to get used to ever. So I think every single time, like there's bombs dropping on you, you're probably like shocked that it's happening. You know what I mean? Like it's not, yeah. And I think that's also part of the whole point of this genocide, I think, is to it's to exhaust all of us, actually. And yeah, I don't know.
You know,
it's really hard to talk about this, actually. Like,
you know, when you were saying there, you know, it's not possible to get used to it, I was thinking that perhaps there was also a statement. Well, first, it's like a success of that propaganda of hierarchizing humanity, right? And also, it's a success, or it's a way of saying, you know, you can get used to oppressing, right? So that's a statement that you have accepted that, you know, this is a natural way of being, oppressing, you know, a group of people. If that's the case, and so for me, it's more a comment about that, that there's a group that's used to doing violence. So that's what you're talking about, not that people are used to, you know.
and then there's others who are used to witnessing that, I think.
But there's also like the way in which, you know, like no one in Gaza, of course, right now is used to the bombs endlessly falling, and like 2,000-pound bombs endlessly falling. And we certainly know that. I mean, I'm sure we've all seen videos of children horrified and terrified because they're hearing explosions everywhere, and the look of shock on their faces, and the kinds of, you know, stories of, you know, mothers telling their children, you know, that it's okay because if it happens, they'll all die together. And so no one is used to it. But it's also interesting that there's a certain kind of like expectation um that it's not exceptional, in other words, that bombs are falling, like the war in Gaza itself like is not an exceptional framing, right? But what, like, we also know that like when hostages were taken, when Israelis were taken as hostage, and which has also historically happened before, that is exceptional, and it's exceptional every time, and it's exceptional within Israeli media, and it's exceptional within US media, and this becomes like a heightened topic, and every single one of those people who is taken hostage, many of them soldiers, right, are exceptional cases of, you know, humanitarian need and, you know, morality gone terribly wrong. And you know, that is also like a contrast, that it's that sets up the kind of, you know, the natural hierarchy of who is a natural object of bombing and other violence, and who is absolutely not a natural, you know, object of that and must never experience that kind of violence.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's also a part of the Islamophobic media. I mean, like, media is quite on a global scale, quite like singular in a way in terms of its dominance. So I think part of that dominance is also its Islamophobic character in a way. So
Yeah.
but as we're talking about this and talking about witnessing, one thing for me when it comes to witnessing is I mean, we talked about this in when we had our call to sort of discuss a bit about the topic, about how we grew up on images of genocide as Armenians, which I wrote to you, Tamar, like a couple of days ago. I realized, I was like, I actually never connected this. Like, it's somehow, I never really connected to like what we're witnessing happening right now. And like, also like how it's affecting me is not just how it would affect anyone. It's affecting me in a particular way because I grew up in a way, like, you know, when you're Armenian, you kind of don't have a choice. You're grown up like told that this is your history, like genocide is your history. So Armenians, Armenia, genocide, Palestine, what connections do we make?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting that none of us actually named Armenia as product, like as what brought us to Palestinian solidarity. And you know, I don't think that, I mean, in some ways, like that makes sense because it's never been connected for us, right? We're doing that work and we're doing that labor of care, and I think that's like something really important. But I didn't, you know, that sentiment, Milena, that you just mentioned, I didn't make that connection until November of 2023. And it was, you know, it was a month into the genocide, and I saw a video. I mean, I am, you know, I have been trying to do my duty to witness. And this is something I think about all the time. I don't want to look away from images that are horrifying and shocking. And I get filled with an overwhelm of emotion, much of it rage, that I often don't have an outlet for when I see images, and they're everywhere and they're all the time. And they're the most horrifying images I think that have ever actually been produced for publics. But it's also like I feel like it's my duty to look, and it's my sometimes to do the work of looking, because to look away from that is in itself a violence. Just to look and to be witness to it, I think, is an important thing that we have to do. But when I look, it's, you know, what I mean, I'm sure I don't have to explain that. But one day when I was looking, I saw an image of a man riding his bicycle along the road, and this is when Israel was forcefully displacing Palestinians from the north to the south, and this was in the first like month and a half or so of the genocide. And a man is riding his bicycle and recording what he's seeing, and there's dead bodies strewn across the road, some of them children, with their belongings, and these were clearly people who were trying to escape. They were escaping with their belongings, and their belongings are strewn all over the place as well. There's blood all over the place, and the man recording is also horrified. And he's yelling, you know, Ya Allah, and you know, having no words, right? And that reminded me so much of, you know, like Zabel Yasayan's witnessing work, and what it means to witness, and the really, I mean, the inability to actually make sense, the senselessness of witnessing. And that was the moment for me where I was like, that was for me the moment where I understood genocide. That was the moment for me when I understood what it meant to be, you know, what Erdogan in a few years ago called the remnant of the sword, right? Like, what does it mean to survive and then have to endure survival? What is genocide? I mean, what a horrific act, right? And I, you know, I grew up on it, and I, you know, you know, I've talked on this podcast before about like how I grew up on some of the most nationalist of rhetorics and discourses, and but that was the moment for me where I realized what it meant that when we say, right, the Armenian genocide, what genocide means. It came to me through witnessing the Palestinian genocide.
You know, I also grew up on these images as of the Armenian genocide, as you can imagine, and also I was a latchkey kid, so I would just go, when I grew up in Soviet Armenia, and next to my music school there was a library where I would go, and I don't know why there was no adult supervision or why the librarian didn't say, well, you can't take that book out or it's not age appropriate or something like that. But I would just read these books about genocide and, with a detailed graphic description of torture and stuff. And then kind of had nightmares and fears about that happening to me. And I remember in early 2000s, I just encountered a Turkish person at the airport, and I was thinking, oh, I wonder if we lived at the beginning of the 20th century. Where would this person be? Where would I be? And if someone put oil, I don't know, pulled my nails off and put hot oil, could I have survived it? And would he not let that happen? Or just like this kinds of thinking. But for me, the connection to or connecting genocided people also more actively happened in 2016. And these images, I don't know what your experiences have been, folks, but for me, the images from books on the Armenian genocide or the images of in the media on April 24th, year after year after year in Armenia were produced, but they kind of have this haunting, heavy, weight. And like when I was in my late teens, I was like, I just had to imagine that I'm also Turkish, and then I just forgive my Turkish self and who might have been involved or whoever, and just because it made it so difficult, to live and not having other ways of I don't know, disentangling oneself from this nationalist or singular narrative of being, Armenian and a victim of a genocide as a collective. And then I appreciated finding out the stories of my grandfathers on both sides who were saved by their Turkish neighbors under different, circumstances. And that was very helpful for me that, no men, and I don't know, growing up in a patriarchal society and I guess, I had also internalized these things. So I would just go to my grandfathers to ask them about their lives. And, they didn't want to talk about it. So, I don't know, don't talk to me about it. Instead of going to grandmothers, right? And then, of course, I find these stories of, from the women in my story, in my family. So, so in 2016, connecting, these, because there were discussions of recognizing the Armenian genocide, and these U.S. politicians were, making speeches, and I was thinking if all the genocided people were here, how would they talk about their experiences? They're not talking about that. And then in 2020. During the Karabakh War, I just had to confront my own silences about displacement of Azerbaijanis in early 90s. And that, so that I had myself internalized various forms of hierarchizing humanity, even though I thought that I sorted it out in myself in relation to my Turkish peers, or my understanding of separating government, from people and things like that. And just, through reading Hannah Arendt, that what was most shocking for her in 1930s Germany was not Hitler's rise to power, because that, things were already clear, but the silence of intellectuals around her, with whom she had had these intense intellectual debates and stuff like that, and that so easily falling in line with the ideology of the day, which unfortunately, like heartbrokenly, I can see happening in the US right now, you know, with this turn to authoritarianism in the US, and influential, powerful universities folding. So through that, and I had also recognized, why am I mentioning the 2020 in response to your question, Milena, about genocide, is because of this recognition of internalizing hierarchies of humanity, that why didn't my heart hurt in the same way that an Azerbaijani kid had been displaced in the early 90s, that it did when I'm reading about an Armenian kid experiencing, you know, being displaced during the Armenian genocide in the early, 20th century. It's, I just had to re-walk myself back to my own humanity. And through that, by 2023, I did not experience any hierarchizing, and immediately felt the connection to the heartbeat of all the mothers, and to the heartbeat of all the, you know, the horrified children. So I think teaching genocide in a way that does not contribute to hierarchizing humanity, putting the experience of your people who had been genocided at the top of suffering, is key. Even though, of course, intellectually I knew this and I was teaching this, right? You know, there are these feminist foremothers whom you teach and who talk about how hierarchizing suffering plays to the hand of various oppressive systems. And why would we want to do that? We need to turn towards each other, to care for each other. Yeah, and so I don't know if I'm fully answering your question, but the connection between Armenia, Palestine, and genocide for me is to stay soft and connected in our humanity to each other, and be vigilant about being recruited into hierarchizing suffering, so that doesn't happen, because when it happens, then we act like the Israeli government. And I should say, I needed to say this at the beginning. I am speaking as an individual feminist anthropologist. I am not speaking as an employee of Emerson College. And this might make sense to some listeners and not others, but under the current, you know, in current political circumstances in the US, this needs to be said.
I also feel like I should have mentioned maybe like a little bit earlier on that this is actually not an easy topic to talk about, but also to listen to. So if our listeners, I hope you've found ways to take care of yourselves while you're listening to this, to today's episode. And yeah, if you need to like take it in little bits, just like staying in this softness that Nelli is talking about. I wanted to kind of come back to something that you were talking about, Tamar, around witnessing. And then you use the word make sense. It's something like basically like, it's just something that doesn't make sense. And you know, the word sense is so important actually, because I think that, I mean, I'm learning, I'm learning right now a trauma therapy method called somatic experiencing, which is actually founded by a Jewish scientist, psychologist, Peter Levine, who worked with Vietnam war veterans, like, and has just created this really amazing like method to work with trauma, which I believe in so much that I'm like really being trained in it. And it's all about the body and the nervous system and what happens to us when we are under threat. And the senses are so important, like in terms of just things kind of shutting down. And it's just like physiologically, like it makes sense for things not to make sense when you're witnessing this type of violence and this type of hostility and like just something that doesn't make sense. So I think that's such a great way of capturing this, and then all the other things that happen as we witness. I think is really important to also mention here. You talked about 2020, Nelly, and I don't know if our listeners, maybe not all are Armenians and not all know that, you know, we had this 44-day war over Nagorno-Karabakh in 2020, where more than 7,000 lives were lost on both sides, mostly young men, soldiers who were conscripted, mostly. And for me, like whenever I think about 2020 and witnessing, it's something like I still haven't fully I feel like you can kind of lose your mind besides just losing your senses when you are under, like, this is more of like an acute or mini sort of like version of what's happening right now when it comes to Gaza. But I remember back then I was thinking about like, why didn't I, or why can't I do something for this to stop, like right now? And like thinking that maybe what is like, just honestly like thinking like, maybe what is the thing that I can do that is the most beyond human? Like that's all I could think about. Like, what is the thing I can't do that is beyond human for this to stop? And I can't do it. Anyway, I'm just I don't think it's easy to witness, and yeah, I mean, I think you're right, Tamar, about when you look away, it's also adding to the violence. I'm always afraid about, like, I think there needs to be a kind of like, maybe, I don't know if I want to use the word literacy in terms of witnessing and how we do that, so that we don't become consumers and then desensitized and then dehumanized, because it's such a cycle. How to witness in such a way where I don't know, like we stay in rage and we stay unwell. Actually, I want to say unwell. I think it's important to stay unwell as we witness, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, can I say something about witnessing too? I think we've had this discussion, maybe witnessing in a way. I think not looking away, staying unwell, but not looking away, not necessarily by looking at severed bodies or at images where I don't know what it would, how if people who have been killed would want me to look at them in that state. So I guess what I'm saying is that I'm also thinking about witnessing in a way that respects the dignity of those whose experience one is witnessing. And yeah, it makes absolute sense what you're saying, Milena, staying unwell. And another way of saying that I've heard, one of my colleagues was saying when we're discussing about when we're discussing this move towards fascism in the US as like staying maladjusted, you know, not adjusting to what one is witnessing, as a way of maintaining not only a sanity but humanity. I think by becoming desensitized, then we're embracing this process of our own loss of responsibility. You know, just acknowledge, just refusing a responsibility. Basically, I think a witness has a responsibility, and then figuring out what that is. Becoming desensitized or just going with, oh, you know, like they're used to that, is relinquishing one's responsibility as a being on this earth. You know, because when I say humanity, it's not a way of putting humans above other beings that are other than human, but rather, you know, I am human, and what is my responsibility as a human? Because trees have their own way of contributing to the ongoingness of life. So what is my responsibility as a human to contribute to the ongoingness of life? Certainly not, you know, embracing war and killing and, you know, adjusting to it and being well when that's unfolding, you know.
Yeah, and about that witnessing, the staying unwell, staying maladjusted, my and I don't know what this says about me, but I tend to I could go about my day, and I know very well that we are living in the time of a broadcast genocide. And I know that as a fact, like cognitively, I'm aware of that. But I could also go about my day and my life if it is not for my sense of responsibility to witness, not my sense of responsibility as a witness, but I every once in a while, and I don't do this like, you know, as some I don't do this with consciously where I go on social media to see images. I don't, you know, there's something delusional about that, I think, but I will come across an image, as often happens. And that brings me back into where we're living in the midst of genocide is no longer a statement, a fact, a discourse. And like I feel like it's been you know, more than a year and a half, and it, you know, in the time, right, in the time that this has been happening, we have all done so many things, right? We, you know, so many other things have happened in daily life that we we have to refuse it as just some kind of thing that we know that's happening in the background, right? And we have to, I feel, you know, the responsibility to constantly foreground it for myself, bodily, emotionally, and in the way that I react in the world, right? Like there's something really perverse about, you know, having come across one of those images and in the next second, you know, in the next room, hearing joking and laughing, right? Like, and it's that jarring, that being unable to adjust to what is the reality that is allowing this to happen, that I feel a responsibility to constantly maintain through witnessing.
I'm wondering if there's any like way to sort of come to an ending of this conversation, which doesn't leave us in despair, but kind of, yeah, I don't know, like, and I don't like the word hope, so maybe, I don't know.
One thing that, is for me, hopeful, maybe, sorry to use
No, it's fine. I mean,
word,
it's still a word to use, so it's fine.
is the fact that these are conversations, like the conversation that we're having right now. I don't know if this conversation has happened before. It must, certainly it's happened historically, right? For the decades of the Israeli occupation of Palestine, and in the aftermath of the Armenian genocide, and the fact that these peoples share lands and places in the world, and pasts in various ways, and in the past and today, right? These are peoples, Armenians and Palestinians co-inhabit various places in the world. But publicly, I have never come across this conversation before. And I published an op-ed in Armenian Weekly in 2023, toward the end of 2023. And it was about how that moment of kind of realizing the historical and present overlap between the Armenian genocide and the genocide of the Palestinians. And I got a lot of comments from people, some who commented on the actual website where it was published, and some who wrote to me personally, telling me that I was the only one that they'd heard speak about this publicly. And I'm sure, as we here are all people who speak about this publicly, I'm sure that we've each heard this in different contexts. But the fact that we are in the moment where we are publicly having this conversation, and that this conversation is now ripe to be had, it might have something to do with the particular kind of the reawakening of thinking about trauma and violence and all of those things amongst Armenians because of the war in Karabakh just a few years ago. I feel hopeful about that. And it's not just Armenians, of course, but a lot of people, a lot of Americans are talking about this, and are more aware of this than they've ever been.
I've actually appreciated that there have been some Armenian Palestinian solidarity events in the past year and a half, and I've been part of, or I've witnessed others, but yeah, I don't remember much. I'm in public, or just from the 5 or 10 people that one knows that are engaged in that, so that kind of skews your own awareness, right? That to what extent it's happening. Yeah, but I agree. It just investing in solidarities with each other. I think for me it's important to do without necessarily doing it to expect solidarity back or something. Because I did notice my own shock in 2020 during Karabakh War, like not seeing fellow feminists, speak up. But so that has been meaningful transformation for me to be in solidarity, because that's how I have come to understand being human. If I'm really earnest about what it means to have a responsibility as a human, and do my teaching, in which all part of what it means to live and be alive on this planet, then paying attention to these moments of need or moments of you know, I don't know, support. I think a language is also kind of sometimes not enough for life. Life is more I experience life more expansive and alive than language in the moment, especially when it's being recorded. I'm sure, like after we're done, then I can have, you know, more ripened way of expressing what the experience is. But what's life-giving for me, and that's how I think about you know, living and being in relation, is just finding spaces of life-giving, you know, relationship, and actually through being vocal in terms of solidarity with the Palestinian struggle, I have found you know, such you know, wonderful comrades, you know, multi-racial, multi-ethnic, you know, religious, a-religious, just like a very, you know, a beautiful, diverse group of comrades with a shared, you know, political commitment, you know, of liberation for all without hierarchizing anyone's suffering. And that has been extremely meaningful for me. So that's what gives me aliveness. I don't know about hope. You know, I remember in 2019, Tamar, we were at a conference, an National Women's Studies Association conference, where Arundhati Roy was the speaker, and someone asked about hope and hopelessness. And, you know, she was speaking about this field between hope and hopelessness, and being on the field, rather than you're either hopeful or, you know, hopeless. And I don't know that hope does anything for me. What does something for me is aliveness in the moment, that just I can experience in all of myself, in all my senses, and I'm stimulated intellectually. My heart, you know, is loving and oriented towards, you know, life, and you know, giving life, contributing to the ongoingness of life. So whatever relationships contribute to that, that's where, you know, I'm oriented towards. Yeah.
I think this is a good note to actually end on, unless there's anything you want to add, Tamar.
I will add to please like and subscribe if you haven't already. Thank you.
I also wanted to mention that we will have in the next episode a Lebanese Armenian poet who we're going to continue talking about the region, Palestine, Lebanon, poetry, Armenia, Armenianness, other Armenias. And that will be, yeah, in 2 weeks from now.
April 18th.
April 18th. Thank you, Tamar. And I'm actually wondering if, I mean, I said that that's a good thing to end on, but I'm wondering if I could read a short poem by the late Mahmoud Darwish, who's a Palestinian poet, who is my favorite, one of my favorite poets out there. So we can end on that, if that's okay. So this is also one of my favorite poems by Mahmoud Darwish. I actually have a tattoo of the first lines on my arm. Another day will come, a womanly day, diaphanous in metaphor, complete in being, diamond and processional in visitation, sunny, flexible, with a light shadow. No one will feel a desire for suicide or for leaving. All things outside the past, natural and real, will be synonyms of their early traits, as if time is slumbering on vacation. Extend your lovely beauty time. Sunbathe in the sun of your silken breasts and wait until good omen arrives. Later, we will grow older. We have enough time to grow older after this day. Another day will come, a womanly day, song-like in gesture, lapis in greeting and in phrase. All things will be feminine outside the past. Water will flow from rock's bosom. No dust, no drought, no defeat. And a dove will sleep in the afternoon in an abandoned combat tank if it doesn't find a small nest in the lover's bed. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Milena. That was a perfect note to end on. And thank you so much to both of you for these beautiful conversations that you are facilitating. I've listened to all your episodes and I will make sure to subscribe. I forgot that.
Thank you so much, Nelli, for joining us in this discussion. Thank you all for listening to Other Armenias podcast. We will see you all next time. Bye.
Bye-bye.